Every person's story has something to teach us. How others view life, how obstacles are overcome, how joy is felt, how fears are faced, how love is expressed. The Matters of Faith podcast explores individual stories of people's lives and how faith plays a part. It may not be your story, but it may help shape yours. And now, Matters of Faith with your host, Jay Wilburn.
You have found the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 196. Standing by, I have Phil Gustafson, and we will talk to him about his spiritual walk, his work as a pastor, and his coaching of spiritual leaders. One of the things we are going to talk about is the certification program through INLP Center. You can find that at inlpcenter.org/coaching-4 as in FOR -spiritual-leaders/again. You can find that link in the description of the show. You'll also find it in the video. It will be a caption as well, so you can check that out, all those places, and we'll talk about what that means in just a moment. Before we get into that, I want to talk to everyone about our advertiser for this episode. Make Pretend, the complete short fiction of Armand Rosamilia, Volume 1, is a great book. I had already pre-ordered it before the ad came through. I've decided that my favorite story in that is At Awake, We Talk About Death. I think that one has a lot of depth to it, but I also love the stories The Louisville Slugger, The Wolf Who Cried Boy, Whippoorwill Valley Road, Stairs to the Ocean. Yesterday and Today is a good story in there I haven't talked about earlier. Two stories I really want to emphasize to folks are the tie-ins to his series. The Dirty Deeds Stakeout story connects to his Dirty Deeds crime fiction series, and Gray Man connects to his Dying Days series. Those two stories I think are great representations of the spirit of those series, and after you read them I think you'll want to pick up those series as well. But the short story collection itself is great. I've enjoyed it, and I think other readers will as well. If you're interested in advertising on the Matters of Faith podcast, you could go to mattersoffaith@jwilburn.com. Email me from that address. You can also use that address for asking questions or making comments, and I'll be happy to share your passions with my audience. And now we will get into the rest of the episode. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network. My guest today is Phil Gustafson. Welcome to the program, Phil.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's a delight to be able to be here and share my story with you.
All right. The way we typically start off is just kind of figure out where your life and faith interconnected. So how did your journey of faith begin?
Well, I was pretty much like most others in the United States in the 50s. I grew up going to church and Sunday school and learning the stories of faith there and enjoying the songs and things like this. My faith took a radical deepening when I was about 10 years old, when our president was assassinated. And within 2 years, we were having a severe crisis within our nation of racial tension and entry into a war that caused me to start questioning and others to start questioning, where is God in all this? What do we need to do to be better, to solve problems? And started my journey looking at my journey of faith, looking at what God could be demanding of us or asking of us. And my focus became in my teenage years of understanding the concept of God. And unfortunately, during that time, I didn't really adopt an experience of God. I knew about God, I knew about the stories, but it was not really touching my heart. It was more embracing my head.
Right.
I at that time, though, because of what I felt demands were when I was 12, I was with my cousins. We were talking about what we're going to be when we grow up, and my one cousin said he was going to be a chef, and actually turned out to be a chef in the Army. Another cousin said he was going to be a wrestler and then a high school principal, and he became a superintendent of schools. And then they asked me what I was going to do. I said, well, either be a test pilot or with jetpacks, because those were big at that time, or become a pastor. And they started laughing at me because they knew what kind of person I was. They said, that's kind of silly. My dad found out, and within 20 minutes, I was sitting with my pastor talking about things. And he took it in his heart to try and help me work through things of faith. My biggest challenge was, at that time, one of my heroes from television was a character on the original Star Trek series, Mr. Spock, who separated emotion from rationality, from logic. And so I felt that's how I initially approached faith. Let's leave the emotional stuff aside. That's cute. That's nice. Those songs are fun. Camp is great fun. But when it comes to faith, we got to be serious. We got to be logical about this. And that ghost haunted me much of my life as I was trying to live with an either or. Either I can be emotional about faith, or I can be rational about faith, and did not see the both and. I failed to see that the whole is better than the sum of its parts. I'd rather deal with the components. I was a psychology major in college, and enjoyed that experience so much so that I was considering going for further degree work in psychology. And the chair of my department, who knew I was also looking at going to be a pastor, said, well, what are you going to do if you go for your PhD? I said, well, when I get my PhD, I'm going to go to seminary. He goes, well, we have enough PhDs in psychology in the world, but your God needs someone like you to be there. And you need to be speaking more to people's hearts than to their heads. And I took that as a great challenge. And when I went to seminary, focused on that part. I gathered as much information as I could. But when I started working with people in matters of faith and hearing their stories, I started seeing that we need to be speaking to one's heart, not just one's head, in faith. And I made a promise to myself that when I became a pastor, I would try not to do either heart or head, but both heart and head when I would work with people, and look for ways to do that throughout my ministry. Just the experience of the people, time and again, helped me to see where faith is more on relationship than it is on knowledge. I'm remembering a delightful young man who was developmentally disabled with a grandfather who was in at that time we called it senility, both asking questions of faith, and all they needed to hear, all they wanted to hear, was that God loved them, mm-hmm. where they were. And I could raise all kinds of great arguments about that, but just having them experience the embrace of God taught me a lot about faith and about how one approaches. I looked for ways of doing this for larger groups within my congregations. I had the privilege of serving Lutheran churches in Western Pennsylvania. I started a church in Missouri and was pastor of a two-church charge in Western Pennsylvania again that merged with a third church. And then my last years in ministry were in Massachusetts, where I had the opportunity to serve a delightful congregation there. During those times, I looked at different things. I think more with the either or heart or head. Was looking at more of that and try to look at systems theory and things like this to work it. But in 2005, I was invited to be part of a program that was offered by a Brethren Church seminary, different denomination seminary, called Pastors of Excellence. And during that time, I got introduced to a concept called NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And it shook me to the core in terms of the insights I was gaining about life and about how I could integrate things rather than living with either or in a digital way. Either I have it or I don't have it. How can we look at both ands? And NLP was a great help for me there. And then as I began working with other pastors as coaching them, I was learning more and more about how in one's faith we need to not look at the components, but realize the sum is greater than the whole of its parts. That if we can look at the holistic measure, and NLP helps craft and reshape one's thought patterns in a way that's helpful to do that. And I was able to integrate that with faith and ministry. Even some basic things of NLP, of how we receive information by vision, by listening, by auditory, or by our feeling, taste and smell, or the other senses. But those three senses, how people prefer one or the other as their primary way of receiving information.
Right.
And if you speak only, if you speak to somebody who's kinesthetic, that is into feeling about what they see, that may not relate to them. But if you can speak to something they may feel, that may be a way of relating to them. And that was a way to help to me shape faith in a way that people could understand and grow.
There's a lot to unpack there, a number of good things that I want to dig into. Now, over the last few years with this podcast in particular, I've interviewed a number of different pastors from different denominations and a number of different spiritual leaders in different aspects of ministry. And I tend to find that, similarly to how a jetpack test pilot, being a pastor is a perilous occupation sometimes. When you first went into being a pastor along that path that you chose, what were some things that kind of surprised you about kind of acclimating to being in that sort of position as a spiritual leader?
I think one of my first surprises was about 2/3 of what I was studying and focusing on in my seminary training was useless. It was nice to know, and I think it's something the proper, but my members in my first congregations could care less what the Greek or Hebrew word was for it. All they wanted to know was what God was telling them.
Right.
And so that was probably my biggest adjustment at first. Was I was told that my initial preachings were often like a lecture from a teacher rather than embracing them, and that was a helpful unlearning for me to find a way to connect, and it took me a couple of years and some great patience on the part of those wonderful people to help me see that what they wanted to hear were stories. They didn't want to hear facts laid out to them. They didn't want me to argue them into heaven.
Right.
They wanted to hear stories about how people encounter God and God's grace. That was a powerful lesson for me.
Yeah, that's good. I've also spoken to a few pastors who have taken the step of planting a church, which, there's the step of knowing you're called into ministry, the step of actually serving a church, and then there's this whole other level of when you're actually planting and bringing up a church from the roots. What was that experience like for you compared to some of your other work as a spiritual leader?
It was an exciting time. I had been serving in regular congregations, and I was asked if I would consider serving as a pastor developer, a starter, and I said, okay. And I said, why? And he said, well, you're demonstrating some skills that would be very helpful, and I think you'd be a good fit for it. And I said, okay. And then I said yes. And then the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which I was a pastor of, changed its whole training protocols and had I had to go through a training there to see if I could meet muster for them. Did that and learned one of the things about starting churches in the early 90s was a lot of door knocking, walking neighborhoods and knocking on doors to introduce oneself and the concept of the church. And I said, it excited me. It was a good chance to meet people, had some great conversations. Some doors slammed on me, but most people were fairly polite about if they were connected elsewhere. If they weren't interested, they would be fine. But then they asked me where would I want to serve. I said, well, anywhere west of the Mississippi. I lived in the east, and so they put me outside of St. Louis in the flood of '93. my church was my mission site was both east and west of the Mississippi with the flood. But as I came there, I was following a person who started the mission there and was not able to grow it to where he felt he could, and other issues came for him to leave. So they brought me in with a 2-year charge to either bring this to a congregation or close it. So I said, well, I don't even close my closet door, so I'm not about to close it. And in 15 months, I was able, with 7,000 door knocks and a lot of networking of people, was able to begin a congregation, stay there for a number of years, for a few years afterwards, to develop a purchase church property and build a church building and get it moving forward. Nearly burned myself out with it because I was trying to put 100 hours of work a week into 168 hours, and that was not healthy for me or for the church. And that led me to going to back to Western Pennsylvania, where I was invited to start a 2-church cooperative, 2 congregations that were near each other. They could not afford a pastor by themselves, but we're looking at working together as one, with 2 places of ministry but 1 mission. And with my experience as a pastor developer, they asked if I would consider doing that, and I spent the next 11 years working with them doing that, and then bringing it to the merger with a 3rd church.
Now, when you made the step of being a local pastor in all these different capacities to being a coach of spiritual leaders, what were some of the similarities to the previous aspects of ministry, and then what was sort of different in that transition? I
encountered coaching when I was part of that Pastor of Excellence program, and found it very helpful for me. And ended up talking to my coach about what it would take to become a coach, and started doing some coaching primarily with spiritual leaders. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America developed a core of coaches for their clergy and for them to work with other spiritual leaders. I went through the training there and mentor training, and the mentor coach I had was also an NLP expert, and took me on as a student. So I got to work on that. The difference, I've done regular coaching with people, helping them work through problems. I've applied coaching principles to a lot of my ministry. My premarital work with couples was often more coaching than it was instructional material. It was helping them articulate what they were looking for.
Right.
But with working with spiritual leaders, there are the Passive Excellence identified through a Lilly Foundation study 4 reasons why pastors were leaving ministry, or spiritual leaders were leaving their ministry over time, and about 65% of them were leaving out of burnout. The rest were leaving. Some were retiring, some were dying, health, legal, ethical issues, those kinds of things, theological issues. But about 65% were burning out, and when they researched why they were burning out, there were 4 principal reasons. One was that they had not had sufficient training to do the job effectively. Secondly, they did not have good boundaries in terms of either they were totally separate or over involved with people in terms of boundary issues. A third issue is that sometimes they had past traumas that they never processed, and then fourthly, unfortunately, some ministers lose their spirituality. They're so focused on doing the things that they didn't be in spiritual. They would pray for the sake of praying, or they would read sacred scripture for preparation for classes or for preaching, but not for their own edification. And so those four journeys, forward journey, outward journey, inward journey, and upward journey, the POE the Passive Excellence talked about. And I found in my coaching with pastors, that helping identify where they were lacking in those four. If it was a skill set, helping coach them to find a resource that would help them get through. If there were boundary issues, helping them articulate where they should be, where they want to be. With inner wounding, helping coach them to recommend, if need be, therapy or processing that wound and their spirituality to do some spiritual guidance. So that's probably the biggest difference I would have with my regular coaching with individuals and with spiritual leaders. Is I tend to focus on those four journeys.
That's fascinating. My wife has been involved in ministry in different aspects. So a lot of times I've been in the role of spouse of minister more than actual ministering. But when you're the spouse of a minister, you're a lot of times called to work just as hard
Yes.
as the actual minister. My wife served as a youth minister at 2 different churches in 2 different states, one Baptist, one Methodist, and
Okay.
it's the experience. Since then, she's worked in non-church ministries, faith-based ministries, but not with the church. So we attend church as just members now, and there's a huge difference in the experience of being a minister or the family of a minister in a church congregation as just being a member of the church congregation. You're almost on 2 different sides of the stage, and you get a different level of information and experience and challenges and all that. One thing that I noticed as the spouse of a minister is sort of that the kind of guarded persona that you sometimes have to put up because you can't share everything with everybody. So there's a small group of people that you can kind of commiserate with. And I imagine that's even more so with pastors who may be the only spiritual leader in their church and that kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to pastors seeking out guidance and help and counseling because a lot of times they're busy being the counselor all the time.
Yeah.
So as you bring a spiritual leader in whatever capacity they're serving and kind of have to convince them to open up to you in ways that they probably are guarded against when they're on the stage as the minister, I guess you'd say. What's that been like in terms of trying to get them to address things with you that a lot of times they aren't able to talk about with anybody else?
A lot of it is developing rapport with the individual, and to let them know that I hold sacred confidentiality, and that nobody in the judicatory will even know that they're being coached by me or anything we talk about. I said, but the only restrictions being if there's threat of life or something like that.
Right.
But in terms of, and once helping them feel safe, they also know that I've been a pastor, so I've walked that walk. Many of the experiences they are having, I have either faced or known others who have faced it.
Right.
So being patient and again using NLP to listen, to hear where they are, to ask those probing questions as a coach, to help them be able to articulate better, become greater, more aware of what is really going on. They may be coming with a particular issue, but it may not be the issue for them to be working on.
Right.
And work. So I take time when I'm doing that. I will generally, when I begin coaching with a spiritual leader, I say I want to do at least 5 sessions with you, and we'll just spend the first couple sessions getting to know each other a little bit, and we can talk about the issue. If it's urgent, we can talk about it. But let's just get to know each other a bit better and build that level of trust, so we can open up more directly. And I find that helpful when they know that nobody knows, and that nobody's going to know that we talked. That I keep that all, and I think that's helpful for them. There's one of the dangers, in particular when I was an active ELCA pastor. I'm now retired, so I'm a little bit out of it. But as an ELCA pastor with other ELCA coach with ELCA pastors, there was some confusion that we might be tied into the judicatory heads, that we would let our bishop know that, that I'm coaching so-and-so. And I would just say that I'm coaching pastors. And I said, it's up to you to reveal whether you're being, or it's up to you. If you wish to share your name, I'll be happy to let the bishop know. But I won't do that without your consent. And when they have that kind of trust in their coach, I think it helps allow them to feel safe to go deeper.
Now, over time, because of course your ministry spans a good portion of recent history.
Yes.
From the time that you first became a pastor to the time that you went into coaching to now, have the challenges of being a spiritual leader changed? I know certain things are probably universal, but are there other things that are significantly different from those milestones in your life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the world has changed entirely. I mean, when I from the geopolitically, from the fall of communism with the threat of nuclear proliferation, now to terrorism and the attacks on people that are not involved in any direct conflict, but just to invoke terror, has had an effect on people. The growth of technology. My last several weeks as pastor were done in virtual worship, using a video platform because we could not gather as God's people, and to be able to be comfortable with that was a challenge. I know several of my colleagues are still working on that, but I mean that's in the last 9 months alone with the pandemic, it has changed significantly. My last 6 weeks, I had 4 people in the hospital that I could not see. Mm-hmm. I would always be present with them, with families. I had to speak on the phone. With one, I was able to do a Zoom call with one person in the hospital because a family member was there. But it changed the nature of things. I think technology has had a great influence. That the door knocking I did in 93 to 95, that probably is not being done much anymore,
right?
Because we've moved away from that kind of environment where you could go knock on a door unannounced and be welcome. And that just now you have to focus on how you can network in other ways. And I have colleagues I know who have successfully church planted with just doing social media and other things, and now particularly with the pandemic, doing a lot of things that way. So I think there's been some significant changes. I think people still yearn for relationship,
right?
And I think that's one of the gifts that spiritual leaders have with communities of faith, whether you're Christian or otherwise. People tend to want to gather with others and find support from each other. And I think that's been an unchanging thing. How we do that has been shaping. I mean, I would do Zoom coffee hours after a virtual worship. I would just have everybody pop up and let's chat, as a way of connecting with people. And people, my members have deeply appreciated the chance to interact with each other that way. And even though they couldn't see each other, they couldn't do that. I think that's been a constant, but how we do it is changing. It used to be paper newsletters going out to people to keep people appraised of what's going on, and now it's all web searching and things like this. And so as I think technology has changed how we can do it, I think it's made it much more current and much better.
Yeah.
Most newsletters were a month out of date.
Yeah.
Now you can be within an hour. I mean, we have in my last parish, we had a death within an hour. The congregation knew the details.
Right.
As opposed to waiting for the newspaper or whatever, they could know that right away. I think that's where technology has been a challenge, but also a benefit.
Right. Now with with COVID and the pandemic and things, yeah, the last several interviews I've done have been largely with authors and people that aren't necessarily serving a congregation directly in any way. It's not unusual for pastors to be busy around the holidays anyway, but this year, pastors that are even willing to talk to me are like, I got to get on the other side of a few things before I'm free for even 45 minutes to talk. I think a lot of them are putting in their 100 hours and stuff like you were talking
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
because they're trying to hold together a congregation that either isn't allowed to meet or is split on whether it's okay to meet or not for sometimes political reasons more than spiritual reasons. And then just trying to deal with a congregation that's struggling and in some cases are catching the virus and having to deal with that and not being able to see loved ones and so forth. What has been your experience with some of the people you're coaching in this particular season of ministry?
It is that tension of how can I do more? What else can I do? And some have said, I don't have the technical skills to be able to set up, these things, and helping them identify people in their congregation or in their community or other colleagues that they could talk to learn how to do these things. Encouraging them to experiment. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Coaching to give one permission to risk and do things differently has been one of the challenges and one of the joys of helping spiritual leaders give themselves permission to try something new. And knowing that we're in unknown territory, that none of us 5 years ago or even a year ago would have thought about how to do church with that when you can't meet. The old the old adage of we've always done it this way is no longer applicable. I mean, congregations are having voters meetings where they decide things, electing people to office within the church, approving budgets, those discussing programs. They're having to do this virtually.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new, they used to rely upon, you have to be there at the meeting in person, no absentee ballots, all those kinds of things which made sense for Robert's Rules of Order.
Yeah.
But don't make sense in a COVID. And learning how to do this and being willing to learn from others. I think that's one of the difficulties many spiritual leaders have is we like to be lone rangers.
Yeah.
And be totally self-sufficient, and to think that we can gather other information to build a ministerium of collegiality with others, and particularly if you're a different denomination, how are you doing it, and can I learn from that? Where we can, rather than trying to seek to be the lowest common denominator, what can we do that's the best about others?
Right.
And share that. So I think in my coaching, that's it. And as I'm working with the course with teaching spiritual leaders how to coach, just helping them find ways to give permission for experimentation is one of the big things.
Now, speaking more broadly, you look back at the history of Christianity. It started out as a very risky venture. But then, as you say, we kind of reach a point, and I think especially in the Western world, maybe especially in America, where there's a lot of this is the way we've always done it because that's safer. Generally speaking, are you spending a lot of time trying to convince pastors to take more risks as you coach them to sort of better themselves and extend themselves?
Yes, what I've done with a couple of my colleagues who are very much into history and looking at is go back to the early church fathers, early church leaders, men and women who in the early century of Christianity, when it was a criminal, it was a crime to be one. The first 3 centuries to see how to learn how they did it and what risks they took, and to appreciate that you're not going to face incarceration for what you're doing. But it's going to upset the apple cart a little bit, but it is okay because that's the pattern that's how the church grew. Saul, who became Paul, a great fanatical Jewish leader, became a Christian to the Gentiles, a leader to the Gentiles to bring the faith there, and took great risks at doing that. And so that we can frame our risks as not quite as great as that, but perhaps opening us up to be more willing to do that.
Now, a lot of times I've interviewed like missionaries and folks who kind of go to the uttermost parts in their ministries. And one thing that I don't hear talked about a lot, but that I've kind of found to be pretty common among them, is they'll go to a place like Tanzania or a place like a place that's been hit by disaster, maybe in Central America or that sort of thing, and serve in those areas, and then they'll come back to their home churches and have trouble settling back into the way things have always been done. They find sort of the patterns that have become comfortable in churches less acceptable to them once they've experienced Christianity kind of on the front lines. Mm-hmm. I guess speaking to that idea broadly, is there something in our typical pew, our comfortable Sunday morning gathering and then moving back on with life? Are there specific things about the experience of Christianity and having a relationship with God that we've sort of drifted away from over time that you see as something we maybe need to get back to?
Short answer is yes.
Yeah.
But we as human beings have psychosocial needs. We need physical safety. We need physiological and physical safety. We need to be able to provide for ourselves. We need to be able to have healthy relationships. Those are all things that we have, and we get comfortable where we are rather than pushing ourselves forward. The hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy, goes from the relationships to mission to self-awareness, or the final one. But people tend to be comfortable or revert when something is threatening in the average pew goer, with particularly with the pandemic. Some have lost jobs. They've had to find other ways of providing finances or security for their family, and so they're looking for consistency where they can, and that tends to lessen the desire for risk. Right. I don't want to lose what I have. I think that's one of the great memes I've seen about the 2020. This is not a year to celebrate what we want, but to give thanks for what we have. Right. And I think that and that's why many people in their churches just want something consistent, something they can depend upon. And if you're trying to change it, that's going to put that at risk, and they don't want to lose that. I think congregations which have been able to navigate through that have been able to implement the changes by casting a vision of what can be. Right. That doesn't take away from what you have, but enriches what you have with something new. That's a challenge for spiritual leaders to be able to lead the people forward that way. But they have to be attentive to where the members are, to learn what the fears are, that why we don't want to do this. I think when I went through my two congregations merging with a third, we spent 2 years getting to know each other and build a level of trust with each other, because these three congregations have been around for 100 years with each other. They distrusted each other. They had bad relationships in the past with each other. And in 2 years' time, we were able to cast a vision of what life could be like if we took our strengths and built on them and overcame the weaknesses we have. And that made for a much better thing. I think that's one way to help, and that's where coaching can help articulate what the spiritual leader sees, or help how the spiritual leader can help their members see something positive coming out of this. What is the positive intent behind making the change? Are we doing it just to change, or are we doing it to see a better world?
going back to some of the stuff we introduced at the beginning of the episode, now if I gathered a group of spiritual leaders just randomly from around the country, even around the world, and I brought up neuro-linguistic programming, most of them probably wouldn't know what I was talking about. But what does that offer that's different from any other coaching program or any other general type of counseling that people might engage?
Yeah, neuro-linguistic programming has been identified since around 1970. Was developed and promoted. It has several names to it, but it focuses on how we receive information and how we process it. And what we can see, aspects of NLP are evident throughout history. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I mean, if you read the scriptures, you have many images. The kingdom of heaven is like.
Yeah.
And you see those images. Metaphor, which is an NLP concept of reaching the subconscious without having to overcome the conscious mind barrier. You reach out to that person. So when Jesus asked, well, who is my neighbor? Well, there was this guy traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he got beat up and was left to die. And two people came by who were proper people, but they didn't want to take the risk or whatever. And the third person, who was the least person you expect to do this, took care of this. Now, who was the neighbor? Well, the person who did that kind of metaphor is there. I think reframing, helping a person see the same thing from a different point of view.
Right.
That's part of NLP. A lot of pastors a lot of social spiritual leaders are doing NLP without knowing what it is.
Right.
And that's what the NLP training that I'm connected with helps you do, is become aware of what it is you're doing, so you can impart it better. Like, for instance, my preaching, I would use visual, auditory, and kinesthetic cue words, so that people who that was a preferred way of receiving information could feel connected. And other pastors will do that, but they aren't thinking, I'm going to do a visual cue here. I'm doing that. They would just, when they would tell the story, they would make sure that there's something, would tag people who focus on listening, tag people who focus on what they could see, and tag people on what they could feel. So I think that NLP does that. There's another NLP concept is timeline. As we look at a pattern of behavior that may result in not being resourceful, where did this begin? What was life like before that happened? What could life be? What would life be if this is resolved? And so timeline takes you back and forward that way, and you can work on, you can help work through, particularly with trauma or negative events in the past. You can learn what it was like beforehand and what can be done afterwards. So different NLP concepts. And in coaching, I think having the ability to do that, to help a person see from a different perspective. We often say things from our point of view, but what is our church member who's having struggles? What does their point of view look like? How can we understand that? Those are all parts of NLP, and I think that's where it helps.
And we mentioned the link at the beginning of the program, and as I mentioned, it'll be in the description. It will be in captions on the video itself. Talk to me about the certification program through INLP, the INLP Center that you're involved in. Like, how does somebody get involved? What do they get through it?
The INLP Center has a life coach program which teaches life coach skills, which can lead to certification, for a person to be certified from the International Coaching Federation with an ACC certification, which is the first level of coaching. The life coach program is an online program. You do modules of study at your own pace, and then there are live sessions that you can go to have questions answered to help process things through. My program is ancillary to that life coach program. So they take the full life coach program, but they also take my modules. And the INLP Center gives you lifelong access to the material and lifelong access to the live sessions. So it's a helpful thing. We at the INLP Center, there are students who graduated 5 or 6 years ago who still were able to come back to the live sessions, or as material gets updated, they can go look at the material again without having to pay another fee.
Oh, that's excellent.
Which is excellent. And the staff at the INLP Center who do the live sessions are just it's a passion for them. It's not just a job for them. They're seeking to help the student do the best they can, and so it's and there's, like I said, it's all online, so it's all self-paced. As long as you have access to the internet, you can do it anywhere. And we have students. I don't think there's any students in Antarctica, but I think every other continent has students. They may be one or two, but I think it's from every other and some of the staff is from Europe, Australia, as well as the United States. So it's a good. Like I said, it teaches NLP as part of it, and helps you become comfortable with that. In how can it help you with coaching?
That's excellent. Again, want to direct everybody before we go to the link itself, inlpcenter.org/coaching-for-spiritual-leaders and / again. And that link will be in there for you to check out as you go. Before we leave, I want to remind everybody our sponsor for this episode is Make Pretend, the complete short fiction of Armand Rosamilia, Volume 1. I've spoken very highly of it. I've bought it myself and have enjoyed it very much, all the stories involved, and I encourage readers to check that out, as well as the link that we've discussed in the program. Before we go, thanks again for being on with me, Phil.
Thank you very much, Jay, for this opportunity.
All right, and I look forward to feedback from our viewers. Thank you all for listening in, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.